Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to a time when the world trembled before the might of horseback warriors, but we're not just marveling at their conquests. Instead, we're pulling back the animal hide curtains on the awful betrayals within the Khan family. Imagine yourself in the windswept, vast steppes of Mongolia in the late 12th century. You're not just seeing nomadic camps, you're feeling the biting wind on your face, smelling the smoke from felt yurts, and hearing the distant neigh of horses. Knowing that beneath the surface of tribal life, a constant, brutal battle for survival and supremacy is raging, this isn't some peaceful campfire story. This is a real-life epic of hardship, cunning, and the chilling ruthlessness required to unite warring clans and conquer half the world. Seriously, if you were a child in Temujin's early life, your chances of surviving childhood were slim, and the idea of building an empire would seem like a madman's dream. Trust me, you probably wouldn't last a single winter. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Mongolian steppes in the late 12th century. This isn't a land of established empires or grand cities. It's a vast expanse dominated by nomadic tribes, constantly feuding, raiding, and struggling for dominance. Life is brutal, short, and precarious. Loyalty is fleeting, and betrayal is a constant shadow. This is the world that gives birth to Temujin, the future Genghis Khan. You observe Temujin's early life, and it is a testament to the awful betrayals that shaped his character and his relentless drive for loyalty. Born into a relatively respected clan, his childhood is quickly plunged into hardship. You witness the first great betrayal of his life when he is just 9 years old. His father, Yasuge, a minor chieftain, is poisoned by a rival Tatar tribe. This isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a catastrophe for Temujin's family. His father's former followers, fearing a weak leader, abandon his family, leaving his mother, Holin, and her 7 young children, utterly destitute. You feel the profound sense of abandonment, the chilling realization that in this world, even loyalties can disappear overnight when power shifts. It's like watching a seemingly secure family suddenly lose everything, leaving them utterly vulnerable in a cutthroat environment. Temujin and his family are forced to survive by their wits alone, scavenging for food, enduring starvation, and constantly fleeing from hostile tribes. You see him learning to hunt, to track, to endure unimaginable hardship. This brutal upbringing instills in him a fierce independence and an unyielding will to survive. But the betrayals continue. His half-brother, Bekter, attempts to usurp his authority and seize control of the family's meager resources. In a moment of chilling pragmatism, Temujin, still a teenager, executes Bekter. You feel the raw, desperate need for self-preservation. The understanding that in this brutal world, even familial bonds can be secondary to survival and control. One of the most profound and formative betrayals in Temujin's early life involves his childhood blood brother, Jamuka. You witness their early bond, a deep friendship forged in shared hardship and loyalty. They ride together, fight together, and even swear an Anda blood brother oath, pledging lifelong loyalty. For a time, they are inseparable, a formidable duo. However, as Temujin's power grows and he begins to attract more followers, Jamuka's jealousy and ambition begin to fester. He chafes under Temujin's growing leadership, believing they should be equals, not one subservient to the other. This rivalry escalates into open conflict. You see them battling each other on the steppes. 2 men who once shared a deep bond, now leading armies against one another. This is the awful betrayal that teaches Temujin a profound lesson. Even the closest bonds can be broken by ambition. And that absolute loyalty is the only foundation for true power. While Genghis Khan would later be known for his fierce loyalty to those who remained true to him. This lesson about the fragility of trust, learned from Jamuka's betrayal, undoubtedly contributed to his later ruthless demand for unwavering fealty from his subordinates. Historians still debate the exact dynamic between Temujin and Jamuka, whether their conflict was an inevitable clash of ambitious leaders or a genuine tragedy of a broken bond. But its impact on Temujin's worldview is undeniable. Temujin also faces the horrifying experience of being captured and enslaved by a rival tribe. The Taichiud, you feel his desperation, his humiliation as he is paraded with a wooden collar around his neck. But he eventually stages a daring escape, aided by sympathetic individuals. This experience further hardens him, reinforcing his distrust of outsiders and solidifying his belief in the importance of absolute control and internal loyalty. His most trusted early ally and general is Bo-Orchu, a man who would become one of his 4 steeds, signifying his unwavering loyalty. You observe Bo-Orchu's early act of devotion, when he rides for days to help Temujin search for stolen horses. An act of selfless loyalty that earns him Temujin's undying trust. This contrast between the numerous betrayals Temujin suffered and the absolute loyalty he received from a few key individuals is a defining theme of his rise. It teaches him that true power is built not just on strength, but on unwavering, proven fealty. By the early 13th century, Temujin has, through a combination of ruthless military genius, cunning diplomacy, and a profound understanding of loyalty and betrayal, managed to unite the disparate and warring nomadic tribes of Mongolia under his single banner. He has crushed all his rivals, including his former blood brother Jamuka, whom he executes, but with the honor befitting a warrior. You feel the culmination of his life struggle in 1206, when a great Kurultai assembly of all Mongol tribes proclaims him Genghis Khan, universal ruler, the awful betrayals of Temujin's early life. From the abandonment by his father's followers to the treachery of his half-brother and blood brother, forged in him a chilling determination to ensure that such disloyalty would never again threaten his power or his family. His subsequent reign as Genghis Khan, marked by astonishing conquests and a fearsome reputation, was built on an absolute demand for loyalty and a brutal punishment for betrayal. He understood that in a world where trust was a rare commodity, unwavering fealty was the true currency of empire. This early history of betrayal, while painful, becomes the grim foundation for the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. Setting a precedent for the equally awful betrayals that would later tear apart his own dynastic legacy, you now find yourself within the formidable, yet inherently fragile, family structure that Genghis Khan meticulously constructed to govern his nascent empire. Having united the Mongol tribes through ruthless determination and a demand for absolute loyalty, he understood that the true test of his legacy would be whether his vast conquest could be held together by his own sons and grandsons. You observe the early unity, forged by a shared purpose and an unwavering devotion to the great Khan, but also sense the subtle emergence of the very rivalries and betrayals that would ultimately splinter his colossal dominion. This is the awful truth of dynastic ambition. Even the strongest bonds can fray under the weight of immense power. Genghis Khan, with an unparalleled foresight for his time, established a clear system for the succession and governance of his empire. He divided his vast territories, already stretching across much of Asia, into Ulis appanages or regions to be inherited by his 4 principal sons by his chief wife, Berta Yochi, Chagatai, Ogadei, and Tolui. You see him carefully delineating these territories, attempting to create a framework that would prevent the fratricidal wars common among nomadic peoples. His primary goal was to ensure the continued unity of the Mongol nation under a single great Khan, who would always be a descendant of himself. It's like watching a CEO meticulously draw up a succession plan for his megacorporation, hoping to avoid a messy boardroom battle after he's gone. You observe the unique roles assigned to each son. Joki, the eldest, received the westernmost lands, destined to become the Golden Horde, stretching into Russia. However, his paternity was questionable. Borta was captured early in their marriage and may have been raped, giving birth to Joki shortly after her return, creating a subtle yet persistent stain on his legitimacy and a source of tension among his brothers. You feel the quiet discomfort, the unspoken doubt, that clung to Joki, even as he was treated as Genghis Khan's son. Chagatai, known for his strict adherence to Mongol law and tradition, received territories in Central Asia, including what would become the Chagatai Khanate. He was the guardian of the Yasa, Genghis Khan's code of law, Ogadei. Perhaps the most diplomatic and personable of the brothers, was chosen by Genghis Khan to be his successor as Great Khan. Overseeing the entire empire, this was a crucial decision, explicitly designed to avoid a succession crisis. Tolui, the youngest, inherited the Mongol homeland, including the vast bulk of the Mongol armies. This was significant because the youngest son traditionally inherited the ancestral lands in Mongol custom, for a time, under Genghis Khan's direct leadership. The system functions remarkably well. You witness the brothers working together, leading their armies in devastating campaigns that expanded the Mongol Empire across Eurasia. Their loyalty to their father and to the Mongol nation is paramount. You feel the power of their shared purpose, the sheer momentum of their unified conquest. It's an astonishing display of organized destruction, driven by a single vision. However, even during Genghis Khan's lifetime, the seeds of discord are subtly sown, hinting at the awful betrayals to come. The rivalry between Josi and Chagatai is particularly pronounced. You see their open animosity, their constant bickering, often regarding Yoshi's contested legitimacy. At one Kuriltai, Chagatai even publicly declares that Jochi is not Genghis Khan's son, creating a deep rift that the Great Khan himself struggles to mend. This public questioning of Jochi's birthright underscores the fragile nature of their unity. Even under the iron will of their father, an intriguing yet often overlooked detail is Genghis Khan's deliberate strategy of intermarriage between his children and those of his closest generals and allies. While this forged powerful bonds of loyalty, the Nokur system, it also created an incredibly complex web of familial obligations and rivalries when future generations of this extended family vied for power. These intermarriages could create devastating, multi-layered conflicts, turning loyalties against each other. It's like creating a massive interconnected family tree, but realizing every branch has a potential conflict of interest. Genghis Khan also understood the need for a mechanism to determine future Great Khans. He established the tradition of the Kuriltai, a great assembly of all Mongol princes and generals. To elect the next Great Khan, this system, while designed to prevent succession crises, would later become the very arena for bitter and often violent power struggles. You feel the inherent tension in this democratic-seeming process within an autocratic empire, where every vote holds immense weight and every negotiation could lead to future conflict. The awful truth about this early period of Mongol unity is that it was largely maintained by the overwhelming personal authority and charisma of Genghis Khan himself. He was the ultimate arbiter, the undisputed leader whose will was absolute. His sons, while powerful, largely submitted to his vision. However, the inherent tensions Yoki's legitimacy, the differing personalities and ambitions of his sons, and the vastness of the empire itself were quietly festering beneath the surface. It's like watching a powerful glue holding disparate objects together, but knowing that once the glue dries and the pressure is released, the objects might begin to shift and separate. By the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, He leaves behind an empire of staggering size and a well-defined plan for its future. He has instilled in his sons a deep respect for the Yasa and a nominal commitment to imperial unity. However, the system is fundamentally dependent on his sons' willingness to adhere to his vision and to overcome their personal rivalries for the sake of the greater Mongol nation. The stage is now set for the first great test of the Khan family's unity, a period where the seeds of discord sown in the patriarch's lifetime will begin to blossom into open conflict, leading to the gradual and awful splintering of the largest land empire the world has ever seen. The initial unity, while impressive, was merely a fleeting moment before the inevitable betrayals began. You now enter the perilous period immediately following the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, a moment that tests the very foundations of his colossal empire. Despite his meticulous planning for succession and his emphasis on unity, you witness the initial struggles for power among his sons and grandsons. The subtle fracturing of a once unified vision. This isn't an immediate collapse, but a gradual, insidious process where personal ambition begins to chip away at the formidable edifice built by the great Khan, leading to the awful betrayals that would ultimately splinter his dominion. You feel the immense pressure on the new leadership, attempting to hold together an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, all without the undisputed authority of its founder. Genghis Khan had designated his third son, Ogedei, as his successor. You recall Ogedei as perhaps the most diplomatic and personable of his brothers, chosen precisely for his ability to mediate and maintain unity. You observe the initial transition, marked by a respectful adherence to the great Khan's will. The Kurultai, the Great Mongol Assembly, formally confirms Ogedei as the Great Khan in 1229. This adherence to the founder's wishes is a testament to the immense respect and fear Genghis Khan commanded even in death. For a time, the empire continues its expansion, launching devastating campaigns into Russia and Eastern Europe. Under Ogedei's overall command, you feel the lingering momentum of conquest, fueled by a shared, albeit sometimes fractious, purpose. However, beneath this veneer of unity, the seeds of discord sown in Genghis Khan's lifetime begin to germinate. The deep-seated rivalry between Ogedei and Chagatai, the guardian of the Yasa, becomes apparent. Chagatai, known for his strict adherence to Mongol law, often chafed under Ogedei's more lenient or pragmatic interpretations of governance. You see them bickering over administrative decisions, over the treatment of conquered peoples, and over the exact application of Mongol law. These arguments, though initially confined to verbal disputes, represent the earliest cracks in the unified imperial structure, hinting at the differing visions for the future of the empire among Genghis Khan's direct descendants. The problem of Jochi's line, destined to rule the westernmost Ulis, the Golden Horde, also becomes a source of tension. You remember the lingering doubts about Jochi's paternity. His early death in 1227 means that his sons, notably Batu Khan, inherit his vast territories. While Batu is a formidable general who would lead the Mongol invasion of Russia and Europe, his relationship with the other branches of the family, particularly the Ogedeids and Chagataids, remains strained. You feel the subtle exclusion, the lingering suspicion that colored their interactions, preventing true cohesion. The very success of the Mongol conquest inadvertently exacerbated these internal divisions as the empire expanded. The distances between the various ulis grew immense, making centralized control from the capital in Karakoram increasingly difficult. You observe the great Khan's authority becoming more symbolic than practical over the distant Khanates. Each ulis began to develop its own distinct identity, its own local interests, and its own ambitions for further conquest and wealth. This geographical dispersal made it easier for internal rivalries to fester and grow. Far from the direct oversight of the great Khan, An intriguing, yet often overlooked, detail is the economic strain that began to emerge within the vast empire. While conquest brought immense wealth, the cost of administering such a massive territory, maintaining vast armies, and providing for the lavish Mongol courts became immense. The differing economic practices and priorities of the various Khanats, from the agricultural wealth of China to the nomadic steppes and the urban centers of Persia, created internal friction and competition for resources, further contributing to interfamilial disputes. Upon Ogedei's death in 1241, the fragility of Genghis Khan's succession plan is fully exposed. You witness a prolonged and chaotic regency period, largely dominated by Ogedei's ambitious widow, Toragin Khatun. She maneuvers skillfully, manipulating the various princes in general to secure the succession for her own son. Guyuk Khan. You feel the fierce ambition of these Mongol women, often overlooked in the annals of conquest, who wielded immense power behind the scenes. Toragin uses bribery, lavish gifts, and political favors to sway the Kurultai, demonstrating that the election of the Great Khan was far from a purely meritocratic process, but rather a brutal power struggle. Guyuk Khan's brief reign 1246 to 1248 is marked by attempts to reassert centralized authority, but also by growing tensions with other branches of the family, particularly the descendants of Tolui the Toluids and Jochi the Jochids. You observe Guyuk's deep suspicion of Batu Khan, the leader of the Golden Horde in the west. Their mutual animosity becomes so severe that Guyuk begins to march his army westward. Intending to confront Batu, you feel the imminent threat of a full-blown civil war, a catastrophic clash that would tear the empire apart even further. However, Guyuk's sudden death in 1248 under mysterious circumstances averts this immediate conflict, while often attributed to natural causes. The timing and the political climate made many suspect foul play. You feel the chilling possibility of assassination, a silent testament to the brutal stakes involved in the struggle for the Mongol throne. His death throws the empire back into another period of regency and renewed infighting. The awful betrayals of this early post-Genghis Khan period are not always about overt war, but about the insidious undermining of imperial unity. It's about the relentless jockeying for position, the manipulation of succession, the quiet defiance of the Great Khan's authority by powerful regional Khans, and the growing sense of separate identities within the various ulus. Genghis Khan had built an empire on loyalty, but his sons and grandsons struggled to maintain that loyalty to a central figure, preferring to pursue their own regional ambitions. This period of internal strife and fracturing sets the stage for the next generation of Khans, who would employ even more ruthless methods to seize and consolidate power, leading to outright civil wars that would irrevocably shatter the once unified Mongol Empire. The initial respect for Genghis Khan's vision gradually gives way to naked ambition, transforming the family's shared heritage into a battleground for individual glory. You now witness a new generation of Genghis Khan's descendants rising to prominence, their ambitions sharpened by the years of internal strife and the lessons learned from their predecessors' missteps. This is a period marked by brutal purges, cunning political maneuvering, and a relentless drive to consolidate power. Particularly within the Toluid line, you feel the chilling ruthlessness that defines these new leaders. As the once unified Mongol Empire begins to fracture irrevocably into distinct, often warring, Khanates. This is the awful truth of unchecked ambition within a vast, fragmented dynasty, following the brief and tumultuous reign of Guyuk Khan and the subsequent regency. A profound power shift begins to take place. You observe the rise of the Toluid faction, descendants of Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tolui. While Tolui himself inherited the Mongol homeland, his sons were destined for greater things. The key figures in this ascent are Mongke Khan and his ambitious younger brothers, Kublai and Hulagu. You sense their determination to reassert central authority and, crucially, to seize the Great Khanate for their own branch of the family. Mongol Khan, a formidable military commander and a disciplined administrator, is elected Great Khan at the Kurultai of 1251. His ascension is not without controversy. You witness the cunning political maneuvering orchestrated by his mother, Sorghaghtani Beki, a brilliant and pragmatic woman who worked tirelessly to advance her son's interests. She secures support from various factions, often through strategic alliances and promises of patronage. The election itself is disputed by the Ogdades and Chagattades, who believe the Great Khanate should remain within their lines. You feel the deep-seated resentment and the underlying tension of this transition, knowing that this dispute will inevitably lead to further conflict. It's like watching a hostile takeover of a family business, where the new management immediately starts clearing house. Mongol's reign is characterized by an iron fist and a systematic effort to eliminate any lingering opposition from the rival Ogadai and Chagatai lines. You observe the brutal purges he orchestrates to consolidate his power. Princes and generals from the Ogadide and Chagatai factions who had opposed his election are arrested, tried, and often executed on charges of conspiracy or disloyalty. Their lands and wealth are confiscated, and their military retinues are absorbed into Mongol's own forces. You feel the chilling efficiency of these purges, a clear message that dissent would no longer be tolerated and that the Toluid line was now firmly in control. This systematic extermination of rival branches of the family is an awful betrayal, a deliberate act of fratricide designed to ensure dynastic supremacy. Mongol Khan also reasserts control over the vast empire through extensive administrative reforms. You see him dispatching his brothers and trusted generals to administer distant territories and to lead new campaigns of conquest. Kublai is sent to conquer Song China, and Hulagu is sent to conquer the Middle East. Establishing the Ilkhanate. These vast military expeditions are designed not only to expand the empire, but also to keep ambitious princes occupied with external conquest rather than internal power struggles. This strategy, however, would inadvertently contribute to the later fracturing of the empire. As these distant Khanates developed their own centers of power, an intriguing and often overlooked detail about Mongol Khan is his religious tolerance. Despite his brutal political methods, he was genuinely curious about different religions and famously hosted debates between Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and Taoist scholars at his court in Karakoram. This policy of tolerance, unusual for the time, was a pragmatic attempt to secure the loyalty of diverse conquered populations. But it also reflects a less dogmatic side to his formidable personality. Historians still debate whether Mongol's tolerance was purely pragmatic or if he harbored genuine intellectual curiosity that distinguished him from some of his more zealous successors. The ambition of Kublai Khan, Mongol's younger brother, begins to loom large during this period while obedient to Mongol. You observe Kublai's strategic brilliance and his growing fascination with Chinese culture and governance. As he leads the conquest of Song China, he begins to lay the groundwork for his own empire. Separate from the Mongol homeland, you sense his burgeoning independent ambition, a vision that would eventually clash dramatically with that of his brother, Arik Boke. The awful truth about this period is that the centralization of power under Mongol, while ending the immediate chaos of the regency, came at a terrible cost. The systematic purges created deep-seated resentment and fear among the surviving members of the Ogadai and Chagatai lines, while suppressed for a time. These bitter memories would fuel future conflicts, ensuring that the dream of a truly unified Mongol Empire under a single great Khan would forever remain elusive. The seeds of civil war, meticulously planted by Mongol's consolidation of power, were now ready to sprout. Mongol Khan's death in 1259 while campaigning in China plunges the Mongol Empire into another, even more devastating, succession crisis. This time, The conflict erupts directly within the Toluid family itself, between his two powerful brothers, Kublai and Arik Boka. This immediate power vacuum, combined with the immense distances and the already existing resentments from Mongol's purges, sets the stage for the most significant and destructive of all the internal Mongol conflicts, the Toluid Civil War. A fratricidal struggle that would irrevocably shatter the unity of Genghis Khan's vast empire. The ruthless tactics employed by Mongol to secure his position would now be turned inward, leading to the ultimate and awful betrayal among brothers. You now witness the most devastating and personal of all the awful betrayals within the Khan family, the Toluid Civil War. This isn't a conflict against external enemies or rival branches. This is a brutal, fratricidal struggle between the two most powerful brothers of the Tolui lineage, Kublai and Arik Boke. This war, fought over the ultimate prize, the title of Great Khan and control of the Mongol Empire, irrevocably shatters the unity forged by Genghis Khan and fundamentally alters the course of Mongol history. You feel the profound tragedy of a family tearing itself apart, proving that even the most formidable empire can be consumed by internal ambition. The conflict ignites immediately upon the death of Mongol Khan in 1259. You recall that Mongol, while campaigning in China, died suddenly, leaving a dangerous power vacuum. At this moment, his two brothers are in vastly different locations. Kublai is in China, deeply engaged in the conquest of the Song dynasty. He has already adopted many Chinese administrative practices and is building a strong power base in the East. You observe his strategic mind, his administrative brilliance, and his growing inclination towards a settled, sophisticated empire rather than the traditional nomadic lifestyle. Arik Boka is in the Mongol homeland, Karakoram, the traditional capital. He represents the conservative, traditionalist faction of the Mongols, deeply rooted in the nomadic ways and wary of the Sinicization adoption of Chinese culture that Kublai is embracing. He controls the ancestral lands and the vast bulk of the Mongol forces there. The traditional Mongol custom dictates that a Kurultai Grand Assembly must be convened in the Mongol homeland to elect a new Great Khan. You see Arik Boka, being in Karakoram, quickly convenes his own Kurultai in 1260 and is proclaimed Great Khan. He has the advantage of being on the ancestral lands and having the support of many traditionalist Mongol princes and generals. However, Kublai, recognizing the immense stakes and sensing that Arik Boka's election would undermine his own power and vision for the empire, takes an unprecedented and audacious step. He convenes his own Kurultai in Kaiping, near modern-day Beijing in 1260, where he, too, is proclaimed Great Khan. You feel the seismic shock of this moment. Two rival Great Khans, two simultaneous Kurultais, each claiming supreme authority. This act of blatant usurpation and defiance of tradition by Kublai immediately triggers the Toluid Civil War. It's like watching two brothers after their father's death. Both declare themselves the sole heir to a massive inheritance, leading to an immediate, bitter lawsuit that turns into a street brawl. The war lasts for 4 brutal years, 1260, 1264. You witness the terrifying spectacle of Mongol fighting Mongol, brothers leading armies against each other in a conflict that bleeds the empire dry. The war is primarily a struggle for control over the Mongol homeland and the vast resources of China. Kublai's strengths: he controls the immense wealth and agricultural resources of North China, allowing him to provision his armies more effectively. He also has access to Chinese siege engineers and administrators. You see him leveraging his strategic vision and superior resources. Arik Boka's strengths: he has the symbolic legitimacy of being elected in the homeland and the support of many traditional Mongol cavalry forces. He fights to preserve the nomadic Mongol identity and control over the ancestral heartland. The conflict is marked by relentless campaigns, sieges, and a strategy of attrition. You feel the sheer scale of the logistical challenges involved. As both sides struggle to supply their armies across vast distances, Kublai's control over agricultural regions gives him a distinct advantage over Erik Boka, who relies on the less reliable resources of the steppes and has difficulty feeding his troops. The awful betrayals within this war are numerous and deeply personal. Loyalties are constantly tested and shifted. Generals and princes are forced to choose sides, knowing that the wrong choice could mean ruin, or worse, execution. You see individuals who once fought side by side under Genghis Khan's banner, now facing each other across battlefields. This fratricidal conflict is a profound violation of the unity that Genghis Khan had so desperately sought to instill in his descendants. It's a tragedy of ambition, where the desire for personal power eclipses the broader vision of a unified Mongol nation, and intriguing yet horrifying. Detail about the Toluid Civil War is the deliberate economic warfare employed by Kublai. He cut off Erik Boka's access to the rich resources of China, including grain and trade goods. This strategy of economic blockade slowly starved Erik Boka's forces and undermined his support among the nomadic tribes who relied on trade with China. It was a long, slow squeeze, demonstrating Kublai's understanding that ultimate victory often lay in economic control as much as military might. Ultimately, Kublai's superior resources and strategic brilliance prevail. You witness Erik Boka's forces, weakened by famine and desertion, gradually lose ground. In 1264, exhausted and facing overwhelming odds, Erik Boka surrenders to Kublai in Xanadu. You feel the immense tension of this moment, the defeated brother presenting himself before the victorious one. Kublai, in an act of calculated clemency, or perhaps to avoid making a martyr, initially spares Erik Boka's life, holding him captive. However, Erik Boka dies under mysterious circumstances in 1266, widely believed to have been poisoned by Kublai, ensuring that no future challenge to his great Khanate would emerge from that line. This suspected fratricide, mirroring the earlier, unproven suspicion around Juan Borgia's death, underscores the ruthless nature of power consolidation. The immediate consequence of the Toluid Civil War is the permanent division of the Mongol Empire. While Kublai is officially recognized as Great Khan, his authority over the Western Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Ilkhanate, becomes largely nominal. They develop into effectively independent entities, often recognizing Kublai as a distant, symbolic overlord, but pursuing their own policies and even engaging in their own internal conflicts. The dream of a unified empire under a single great Khan, the vision of Genghis Khan, is shattered beyond repair. The awful betrayals of the Toluid Civil War represent the ultimate fracturing of the Khan family. It was a conflict born from a struggle over the very identity of the Mongol Empire, traditional nomadic values versus a settled, Chinese-influenced dynasty. Kublai's victory solidified his control over China, allowing him to establish the Yuan dynasty, but it came at the cost of the vast empire's unity. The legacy of this brutal fratricidal war is a collection of powerful, yet increasingly separate, Mongol Khanates, each pursuing its own destiny, and each prone to its own internal betrayals and power struggles. The Great Khan's vast dominion, once an unbreakable force, was now irrevocably splintered by the very family he had sought to unite. You now journey westward, far from the Mongol heartland and the battlefields of China, to delve into the intricate and often brutal internal dynamics of the Ilkhanate. This is one of the four major Khanates that emerged from the splintered Mongol Empire, and within its vast territories, covering Persia and much of the Middle East. You witness a new chapter of betrayals and power struggles among Genghis Khan's descendants. This is the awful truth that even a powerful regional empire, founded by conquest, can be consumed by internal strife and the relentless jockeying for succession. The Ilkhanate was founded by Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan and brother of Kublai Khan. You recall that Mongol Khan had dispatched Hulagu to conquer the Middle East in the 1250s. You witness his devastating campaigns, particularly the brutal sacking of Baghdad in 1258, which brought an end to the Abbasid Caliphate, and his expansion into Syria. Hulagu establishes a powerful, yet initially unstable, new Khanate. His initial authority is largely undisputed, as he is the direct representative of the great Khan Monka. Then Kublai. However, the Ilkhanate quickly develops its own internal power struggles, largely centered around the question of succession and the constant tension between different factions within the Mongol elite. Unlike the nomadic simplicity of their ancestors, the Ilkhans rule over settled, sophisticated societies with complex political traditions, often adapting to local customs while maintaining their Mongol identity. This cultural blending, while fascinating, also introduces new layers of complexity to their internal politics. You observe the persistent rivalries among Hulagu's direct descendants. The title of Ilkhan subordinate Khan was theoretically hereditary, but practice often diverged from theory. Upon the death of an Ilkhan, ambitious princes, powerful generals, and influential figures from the court would often vie for the throne, leading to periods of intense political instability. You feel the constant undercurrent of suspicion and plotting, where loyalty was often conditional and personal ambition frequently trumped familial bonds. It's like watching a real-life Game of Thrones unfold, but set in 13th century Persia, with Mongol Khans instead of kings. A particularly awful betrayal within the Ilkhanate often stemmed from the influence of powerful emirs and generals. These were not necessarily family members, but often leading figures within the military or administration who built their own power bases. You see them manipulating succession, supporting one prince over another, or even orchestrating the removal of a reigning Ilkhan if he proved to be weak or unfavorable to their interests. The fragmentation of power meant that even the Ilkhan himself was never truly safe from the machinations of his powerful subordinates. The religious landscape of the Middle East also became a factor in these power struggles. While the early Ilkhans practiced religious tolerance reflecting the Mongol tradition, many later Ilkhans converted to Islam. This conversion, while unifying the Khanate with its predominantly Muslim population, also introduced new fault lines. You observe how religious factions, including powerful Sufi orders and Sunni and Shiite ulama, could influence the court, sometimes pitting different Mongol princes against each other based on their religious inclinations or alliances. This added another layer of complexity and potential for betrayal, as religious zeal could be used to justify political maneuvering, an intriguing, yet dark detail is the widespread belief in poison as a tool of political elimination within the Ilkhanate court. Much like in Renaissance Italy, mysterious deaths of powerful princes or troublesome emirs were often attributed to poison, reflecting the pervasive paranoia and the casual ruthlessness of the era. While concrete evidence is often scarce, the very fear of poison was a potent weapon in the constant power struggles, contributing to an atmosphere of profound distrust even among supposed allies. The most telling example of sustained internal strife comes after the death of Arghun Khan in 1291. You witness a series of weak or short-lived Ilkhans, often manipulated or quickly replaced by powerful emirs. Gaikatu Khan, 1291 to 1295, for instance, was known for his extravagance and reliance on paper money, which alienated many. He was eventually assassinated by rebellious emirs who supported his cousin. Baidu. You feel the constant oscillation between different claimants, none able to truly establish unchallenged authority. This period of rapid succession and assassination underscores the fragile nature of their rule. The awful truth is that the Ilkhanate, despite being a formidable military power externally, was perpetually weakened by its internal divisions, the constant succession struggles, the manipulation by powerful emirs, and the lack of a strong, Consistent central authority meant that vast resources were squandered on internal conflicts rather than on consolidating the empire or facing external threats. This internal bleeding slowly sapped the vitality of the Khanate, preventing it from achieving the long-term stability and imperial grandeur of a unified Mongol state. Historians still debate whether the Ilkhanat's eventual fragmentation was primarily due to these internal dynastic struggles, or if economic factors and pressure from neighboring Mamluk Egypt were more significant in its decline. By the mid-14th century, the Ilkhanate begins its final descent into fragmentation. You witness the increasing power of local dynasties and the proliferation of smaller, independent states within its former territories. The unifying force of the Mongol lineage weakens, and the distant authority of the Great Khan, now in China, under the Yuan dynasty, becomes entirely irrelevant. The once mighty Khanate, founded by Hulagu, ultimately dissolved into a patchwork of independent successor states. No longer ruled by direct descendants of Genghis Khan, the awful betrayals within the Ilkhanate family are a stark reminder that the vast Mongol Empire, though forged by one man's iron will, contained within its very foundation the seeds of its own destruction. The ambition that drove conquest also fueled internal conflict. The constant jockeying for power, the assassinations, and the lack of a clear, stable succession mechanism ultimately led to its dismemberment. The Ilkhanate's legacy is one of both immense power and self-inflicted wounds, a chilling testament to how even the most formidable of empires can be consumed by the relentless internal struggle for control among its own ruling family. You now journey to the vast, windswept plains of Eastern Europe and Russia, to delve into the turbulent history of the Golden Horde. This is another of the powerful Mongol Khanates that emerged from the splintered empire, founded by the descendants of Genghis Khan's eldest son, Jochi. Here, you will witness a relentless cycle of fratricidal wars and bitter infighting, a shocking display of how even brothers of the same bloodline could tear each other apart for the sake of power. You feel the constant tremor of conflict, the shifting loyalties, and the horrifying realization that the vastness of their dominion often made internal cohesion impossible. This is the awful truth of power without clear succession. The Golden Horde was initially established by Batu Khan, the formidable grandson of Genghis Khan and son of Jochi. You recall Jochi's questionable paternity and the rivalry this created with his uncles. Batu, a brilliant military commander, led the devastating Mongol invasion of Russia and Eastern Europe in the 1230s and 1240s, creating a vast empire that stretched from the Carpathian Mountains to Siberia. He established his capital at Sarai on the Volga River. You see his iron grip on the conquered territories, extracting tribute from the Russian principalities and exerting immense power over the region. However, almost from its inception, the Golden Horde was plagued by constant succession struggles among the descendants of Jochi. Unlike the unified rule under the Great Khans, at least in theory, the Golden Horde often saw multiple claimants vying for the throne, leading to recurrent periods of civil war. You observe the vast distances of their territory, which made centralized control difficult, allowing ambitious princes to build their own power bases and challenge the reigning Khan. The most common form of awful betrayal within the Golden Horde was fratricidal conflict. You witness brothers, cousins, and sometimes even fathers and sons, leading armies against each other in brutal wars for control of the Khanate. These weren't just political disagreements, they were often savage. Winner-take-all struggles where the defeated claimant and his family were often executed, blinded, or driven into exile. This constant internal warfare sapped the strength of the Golden Horde, diverting resources and manpower from external conquests or internal development. It's like watching a family constantly self-destruct, unable to escape a cycle of violence fueled by their own proximity to power. A particularly turbulent period occurred after the death of Burqa Khan in 1266. Burqa was the first Mongol Khan to convert to Islam, a significant event that introduced a new element into the internal power struggles. You see him aligning with the Mamluks of Egypt against the Ilkhanate Hulagu's branch, showing that divisions among Genghis Khan's descendants could extend to international rivalries. After his death, the Golden Horde entered a period of instability, with various Jochid princes vying for power, often backed by different factions within the Mongol elite. The horrifying truth of these conflicts is that they often involve the manipulation of the Russian princes. You observe how various Jochid contenders for the Golden Horde throne would demand tribute and military support from their Russian vassals, often forcing these Russian princes to choose sides in Mongol internal disputes. This indirect involvement in Mongol fratricidal wars added another layer of suffering to the already oppressed Russian populace, as they were forced to fight and pay for conflicts that were not their own. It's like watching a puppet show where the puppets are forced to fight each other based on the whims of their bickering puppeteers. An intriguing, yet dark detail of the Golden Horde's internal struggles was the role of the Great Horde versus the various splinter khanates that emerged from it. As the main Golden Horde weakened, powerful regional khans would break away, forming independent entities like the Khanate of Kazan, the Crimean Khanate, and the Astrakhan Khanate. These splinter groups often continued to feud with each other and with the remnants of the Great Horde, creating a multi-layered landscape of constant internal conflict. This fragmentation ultimately contributed to their individual weaknesses and made them vulnerable to the rising power of Muscovy. The reigns of Khans like Uzbek Khan 1313-1341 brought periods of relative stability and prosperity, largely due to his strong leadership and the adoption of Islam as the state religion. You see him consolidating power and extending the Golden Horde's influence. However, his death invariably led to renewed internal struggles, demonstrating the fragility of any peace forged by a single strong leader. Without a robust system for succession, the awful betrayals within the Golden Horde were not always just about military conflict. They involved cunning political maneuvering, secret alliances, and the strategic use of assassination. You hear whispers of princes being poisoned, rivals being ambushed, and entire families being wiped out to secure a claim to the throne. The lack of a clear, accepted rule of succession meant that every prince with a claim, no matter how distant, was a potential rival, and every relative a potential threat. The ultimate consequence of these incessant fratricidal wars was the decline and eventual dissolution of the Golden Horde, while external factors, such as the rising power of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, played a significant role. The constant internal bleeding fundamentally weakened the Khanate. You witness its gradual inability to effectively control its vast territories, to suppress rebellions, or to collect tribute. The continuous infighting allowed its Russian vassals to slowly gain strength, to forge their own alliances, and eventually, to throw off the Mongol yoke. By the mid-15th century, the Golden Horde had fractured into numerous smaller, independent khanates, all still claiming descent from Jochi, but often in bitter rivalry with each other. These successor states would continue to battle among themselves, even as the rising power of Muscovy began to absorb them one by one. The awful betrayals within the Khan family and the Golden Horde stand as a stark example of how the very structure that Genghis Khan devised to unite his empire, the appanage system for his sons, ultimately contained the seeds of its destruction. The absence of a consistently strong central authority, combined with the immense distances and the personal ambitions of numerous Jochid princes, led to a brutal cycle of internal warfare. Their legacy is one of immense initial power and cultural impact, but also one of self-inflicted wounds, a chilling testament to how even the most formidable of empires can be consumed by the relentless internal struggle for control among its own ruling family. Paving the way for its ultimate disintegration, you now journey to the easternmost reaches of the Mongol Empire, to China, where the descendants of Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty. Here, you will witness the slow, agonizing decline and ultimate fall of this mighty Mongol dynasty. a collapse exacerbated by a devastating series of internal conflicts, betrayals, and a profound lack of unity within the ruling Khan family itself. You feel the palpable shift in power, the rising tide of discontent among the Chinese populace, and the chilling reality that even a powerful foreign conqueror can lose their grip when internal cohesion crumbles. This is the awful truth of an empire eaten away from within. The Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, represented the pinnacle of Mongol adaptation and a unique blending of Mongol and Chinese traditions. You recall Kublai's ambitious vision moving the capital to Beijing Dadu, adopting Chinese administrative practices, and establishing a sophisticated, centralized empire that ruled over all of China. For a time, the Yuan flourished, overseeing periods of stability, economic growth, and vast trade networks that connected east and west the Pax Mongolica. However, almost from its inception, the Yuan dynasty faced an inherent tension how to maintain Mongol identity and loyalty while ruling over a vast, culturally distinct Chinese population. This tension was often reflected in the internal dynamics of the Khan family itself. While Kublai was a formidable ruler, his successors often struggled to maintain his level of authority and strategic vision. The awful betrayals within the Yuan dynasty's ruling family primarily manifested as succession crises and bitter feuds among rival princes. Unlike the clear succession patterns of Chinese dynasties, Mongol tradition favored election by a kurultai, which often led to fierce competition and violent clashes among ambitious claimants to the throne. You witness periods of rapid succession, where emperors reigned for only a few years before being overthrown, assassinated, or dying under suspicious circumstances, only to be replaced by another contender from a different branch of the family. This constant instability at the very top of the imperial hierarchy sapped the strength of the government. It's like watching a constantly changing executive board, where every new CEO immediately tries to undo the work of their predecessor and purge their supporters. One significant source of conflict was the division between those who favored Mongol traditionalism, maintaining nomadic customs, military prowess, and the Mongol language, and those who advocated for greater Sinicization, adopting Chinese culture, Confucian governance, and living a more settled, bureaucratic life. You observe these two factions constantly vying for influence at court, often supporting different imperial princes. This ideological divide often fueled the succession struggles, leading to internal purges and further weakening the ruling family's unity. A particularly horrifying scandal was the repeated use of poisoning and political assassination to eliminate rivals to the throne. The vast wealth and absolute power of the Yuan emperors made the stakes incredibly high, leading desperate contenders to resort to extreme measures. You hear whispers of emperors or powerful princes dying suddenly and suspiciously, their deaths conveniently clearing the path for a new claimant, while concrete evidence is often scarce due to the secrecy of the imperial court. The pervasive fear of assassination was a brutal reality that contributed to the constant instability. This internal violence, hidden behind palace walls, slowly eroded the ruling family's legitimacy and unity. Historians still debate the precise number of Yuan emperors who died by assassination or poison, as records are often biased or incomplete. But the prevalence of suspicious deaths is undeniable. Beyond the emperors themselves, the imperial family suffered from rivalries among powerful empresses, empress dowagers, and imperial princes. You see ambitious women manipulating their sons or grandsons, pushing for their own factions to gain control. Princes, often supported by various court factions, would plot against their imperial relatives, seeking to seize the dragon throne. This constant infighting consumed vast resources and energy that should have been directed towards governing the vast empire. The awful truth is that this relentless internal strife created a profound disconnect between the Mongol ruling elite and the vast Chinese population they governed. While the early Yuan emperors, particularly Kublai, had sought to bridge this gap. Later emperors became increasingly isolated within the Forbidden City, relying on eunuchs and court factions rather than engaging with the broader Chinese bureaucracy. This allowed corruption to fester and government to become inefficient, further alienating the Han Chinese population as the 14th century progressed. The Yuan dynasty faced a confluence of mounting crises, exacerbated by its internal divisions. Natural disasters. Devastating floods along the Yellow River and widespread famines crippled agricultural production and caused immense suffering among the populace. Economic mismanagement. Hyperinflation caused by the overissuance of paper money, combined with heavy taxation to fund lavish imperial projects and military campaigns, created widespread economic hardship and resentment. Peasant rebellions. These compounding crises ignited widespread peasant uprisings across China, most notably the Red Turban Rebellion. You recall that this rebellion, fueled by suffering and anti-Mongol sentiment, would ultimately lead to the overthrow of the Yuan dynasty and the rise of the Ming. The Yuan military, once the invincible force that conquered China, became increasingly ineffective. You see it plagued by internal corruption, low morale, and an inability to respond decisively to the growing rebellions. The constant infighting among the Mongol elite meant that a unified, coherent strategy to suppress the widespread revolts was rarely implemented. The ultimate fall of the Yuan dynasty was a direct consequence of these internal betrayals and lack of unity, while powerful Chinese rebel groups delivered the final blows. The empire was already weakened and fractured from within by its own ruling family. The Mongol emperors, consumed by their own power struggles, were unable to rally their forces or effectively govern their vast domains. In 1368, the Ming founder, Zhu Yunzhang, captured Dadu Beijing, forcing the last Yuan emperor, Togon Timur, to flee northward back to the Mongolian steppe. You feel the profound sense of finality, the end of a foreign dynasty that had ruled China for nearly a century. The Yuan dynasty did not fall in a single, decisive battle. It disintegrated under the weight of its own internal contradictions and the awful betrayals that had plagued its ruling family for generations. Its legacy is one of both immense reach and a chilling reminder that even the largest land empire in history could not escape the destructive power of its own internal divisions and the ceaseless, brutal struggle for power within its own bloodline. You now arrive at the overarching conclusion of the Khan family's saga, reflecting on the legacy of division that ultimately fractured the largest contiguous land empire in history. What began with the iron will of Genghis Khan, uniting disparate tribes and conquering vast swaths of Eurasia, eventually succumbed to the very forces of ambition, rivalry, and awful betrayals that he himself experienced in his youth. You feel the profound irony the bonds of family, once the source of their strength, became the instruments of their undoing. You recall that Genghis Khan, in his extraordinary foresight, attempted to mitigate future conflict by dividing his vast empire into Ulus appanages for his 4 principal sons. He designated Ogedi as Great Khan, hoping to ensure a unified central authority. However, this system, while initially effective due to the immense respect and fear Genghis Khan commanded even in death, proved to be inherently unstable over the long term. The very vastness of the empire, stretching across diverse cultures and geographies, made genuine centralized control from the Mongol homeland increasingly difficult. The core of the awful betrayals within the Khan family lies in the consistent failure of subsequent generations to maintain the absolute unity and shared purpose that defined Genghis Khan's reign. Succession crises. You observe the recurring pattern of disputed successions after the death of each great Khan. The traditional Mongol Kurultai system, meant to elect a new leader, often became an arena for fierce political maneuvering, bribery, and open conflict between rival claimants from different branches of the family. This meant that the transfer of power was rarely smooth, consuming vast resources and leading to internal purges and civil wars, fratricidal wars. The most devastating manifestation of these betrayals was the outright warfare between brothers and cousins. You witnessed the Toluid civil war between Kublai and Arik Boka, a brutal fratricidal conflict that irrevocably shattered the unity of the Great Khanate. Similar, though perhaps smaller scale, internal wars plagued the Golden Horde and the Chagatai Khanate. As various princes battled for regional dominance, personal ambition versus imperial unity, the vastness of the conquered territories meant that the regional khans, once appointed to govern their respective ulas, gradually developed their own vested interests and ambitions. Their focus shifted from serving a unified Mongol Empire to consolidating their own local power, often at the expense of cooperation with other khanates or deference to the Great Khan, cultural and ideological divergence. As the Mongol ruling families settled in different parts of their empire, they began to adopt the cultures and religions of their conquered peoples. You saw the Ilkhans converting to Islam, while the Yuan emperors in China embraced aspects of Confucianism. These ideological and cultural shifts created new divisions within the Mongol elite, further fragmenting their sense of shared identity and purpose. The awful truth of this legacy is that the very strength of the Mongol Empire, its rapid expansion and its ability to absorb diverse populations, also contained the seeds of its internal division. The initial flexibility of the Mongol system, which allowed for regional autonomy, eventually led to fragmentation when centralized authority weakened. The absence of a clear, universally accepted rule of primogeniture inheritance by the eldest son, combined with the sheer ambition of Genghis Khan's numerous descendants, created a recipe for ceaseless internal conflict. It's like watching a massive, powerful tree whose roots spread so wide that they eventually crack the very foundation it stands on. An intriguing, yet somber detail often overlooked is the psychological impact of Genghis Khan's early betrayals on his own legacy. His demand for absolute loyalty and his ruthless punishment of disloyalty were born from his own traumatic youth. While he managed to suppress these impulses within his own lifetime, he couldn't instill the same unwavering, selfless unity in future generations. The cycle of betrayal, which he so effectively broke to build his empire, tragically resumed within his own family, ultimately leading to its undoing. The fragmentation of the Mongol Empire into independent khanates, the Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in Eastern Europe, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, was the ultimate outcome of these internal betrayals. While each Khanate continued to wield immense power in its own right for a time, they often viewed each other as rivals rather than allies. This lack of unity prevented a concerted Mongol response to external threats, such as the rising power of the Mamluks in Egypt against the Ilkhanate, or the emergence of the Ming dynasty against the Yuan. The fall of the Yuan dynasty in China is a direct testament to this legacy of internal division. You witnessed how internal power struggles, economic mismanagement, and an inability to adapt to Chinese cultural norms, exacerbated by the relentless internal betrayals, left the Yuan vulnerable to the peasant rebellions that ultimately drove them from power. They were too busy fighting among themselves to effectively govern a vast and discontented population. The awful betrayals within the Khan family serve as a powerful cautionary tale, the fragility of personal empires. An empire built primarily on the charisma and iron will of a single founder is inherently vulnerable once that founder is gone. The corrupting nature of power, immense power, when concentrated within a large, ambitious family, can inevitably lead to internal conflicts. As individual ambition eclipses collective good, the limits of dynastic unity, even the strongest familial bonds, can fray and break under the pressures of imperial succession and the allure of absolute control over vast territories. The legacy of the Khan family is thus a paradox. They built an empire of unparalleled scale and lasting impact, transforming warfare, trade, and cultural exchange across Eurasia. But they also left behind a chilling testament to how the very family ties that forged such immense power could also be the source of its ultimate fragmentation and devastating collapse, leaving a profound and awful shadow over the greatest land empire the world has ever known. The final echoes of thundering hooves and clashing ambition now gently recede. The vastness of the Mongol steppes and the clamor of splintered empires dissolving into the quiet hum of the fan. You drift away from the cruel ties of power and the battlefields of brother against brother, leaving the Khan family to their complex, fractured legacy. Their triumphs and their awful betrayals finally settled into the annals of history. The epic, yet often heartbreaking, tale of their dynasty concludes, allowing you to settle into the peaceful depths of slumber. All the conquest, all the conflict, all the tragedy now melts into the quiet night,